If you got your Bibles, I'd invite you to get them out this morning. We got a lot of stuff to cover. Again, I say that every week, I think. Oh, there's so much stuff to cover. There is actually this week. We're going to be in Daniel chapter 11. We just finished chapter 10 last week. We got 11 and 12 left. Daniel 10, 11, and 12 are all part of one vision that was revealed to Daniel. We have to stop partway through. There's just too much stuff to cover in 1 week. And we're going to be back in Daniel chapter 11 again, page 748 in my Bible. I invite you to get yours out. If you need one and you're here, just head out to the lobby. We've got Bibles out there. Daniel, one of the most attacked books in the Bible, actually. Might actually be even the most attacked book in the entire Bible. I mean, the details that are given here are so great, and the historical facts of the stories that he writes are so verifiable that it's impossible, the thinking is, that Daniel could have wrote those in 550 BC. It just can't happen. It must have been written after all of these events because nobody could provide the details of these events before they'd happened. See, the world makes two assumptions in order to bolster their opinion about the validity of Daniel. One assumption is God didn't write the Bible. Daniel couldn't have written those things. So, therefore, this book was written by someone else and just passed off as Daniel's writing. Or it actually maybe is written by a guy named Daniel, but this Daniel is a liar. And he's a pretender, and he's pretending to live several centuries earlier than he actually did. And today, as we open Daniel chapter 11, we come to the words that are probably, even within Daniel, the most controversial, the most contested words. Chapter 10 started us off on this vision. In the 3rd year of Cyrus, the king of Persia, a word was revealed to Daniel, whose name was Belshazzar. And that word was true, and that word was a great conflict. Remember, Daniel's an old man here. He's probably 83, 85 years old, somewhere there. It's 536 BC. The Babylonian Empire that had conquered Jerusalem and captured Daniel and brought him to live with Nebuchadnezzar in Babylon is gone. It's been replaced by the Persian Empire. And Daniel introduces, or actually the angel introduces the content of his visit to Daniel here in chapter 10 with this in verse 1, and the word was true, and it was a great conflict, it might say in your Bible. It could say great warfare. What I'm here to tell you about Daniel is conflict and warfare. That's going to be my message to you. And the conflict and warfare is going to actually be both angelic and here on the earth. And we learn as we hear the interactions between the beings that are engaged in this vision and this communication with Daniel, that they've been sent to Daniel to explain to him some things. And what they are explaining is the conflict and warfare that is going to go on from now until the end, basically. It's a vision that gives us really vital insights into the nature of reality. And we talked about this last week. It emphasizes that human causes and effects are not the only forces or influences that operate in our world today. The writers of the New Testament affirm this reality. The Gospels contain many stories about Jesus interacting with the unseen world, do they not? And the apostles have a lot of interactions with this realm as well. Paul affirms this reality in all of his writings. Ephesians 6:12 is kind of like the poster verse for this reality. It says, "For we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers over this present darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places." Last week we spent quite a bit of time on this. We ended, and just as the messengers that had been sent to Daniel had gotten Daniel all sorted out. Remember when Daniel sees the vision of Christ and falls down and passes out facing the dirt. And then one of the beings has to come over and kind of help him get to his knees and get his breath back, wake up. And then somebody has to help him stand up, and then he's still freaked out, and they're like, hey, calm down. Don't worry. We're here to give you an answer. We're here because God wants you to know some things. And he's just about ready to be able to have an intelligent conversation and listen to what's going on. And he was just about to deliver his message, and that's where we ended last week. Now, what's the message going to be about? We haven't heard it yet, but we know what it's going to be about already. God's going to answer Daniel's prayers. That's what this whole book is about. Daniel's prayer is recorded for us in Daniel chapter 9, but we would be foolish to think that's like he only prayed that one time. Right? Daniel has been praying for his people his whole life and asking God, what are you going to do? What's going to happen to your people? What's going to happen to your city? What's going to happen to your temple? What's going to happen in these kingdoms of this world? And Daniel's been praying about that for a long time. Prays about the covenant. What about your promises, God? What about Jerusalem? What about your people? God, what are you doing? What's going to happen to us? When will you save us? When will you deliver us? How long, O Lord, is Daniel's prayer over and over again. And this angel is like the rest of them. He's bringing the message sent from God in answer to the questions that Daniel has been asking his whole life, and specifically recorded in Daniel chapter 9. All of these things are God's answers to Daniel. And what is God's answer to Daniel? What's his answer going to be? When Daniel's like, how long, O Lord, will your people be suffering for this? And God reveals to Daniel that as people are in for trouble, God's answer is, this isn't going to stop anytime soon. And God reveals to Daniel his people are destined for tribulation. That the terrible plight of the Jewish people will never be escaped in this age. There will be trouble for them until the end. And they'll face tribulation, and they'll face the assault of the powers of heaven and earth until the day God himself will arrive and end it and rescue them and establish his eternal kingdom on this earth. So Daniel chapter 11, let's just start reading. We'll see what happens. Verse 2, and now I will show you the truth. This is the angelic being, the spirit being coming and talking to Daniel, explains, gets them all started. Okay, everybody ready? It's kind of like Tracy trying to herd all the kids down in children's ministry. Just like, can I get them all in one spot looking at me once? That's kind of the feeling here. Okay, he's finally got Daniel paying attention to him, ready to hear something. Okay, Daniel, now I will show you the truth. Behold, 3 more kings shall arise in Persia, and a 4th shall be far richer than all of them. And when he has become strong through his riches, he shall stir up all against the kingdom of Greece. Then a mighty king shall arise, who shall rule with great dominion and do as he wills. And as soon as he has arisen, his kingdom shall be broken and divided toward the 4 winds of heaven, but not to his posterity, nor according to the authority with which he ruled. For his kingdom shall be plucked up and go to others besides these. Okay. This is a bit of a recap here of what's already being revealed to Daniel in other visions. Okay, 20 years before this, God had given Daniel a vision of the future that has a lot of similarities, or at least starts off very similar to this. It's Daniel chapter 8, and it's the vision of the ram and the goat. And we read in Daniel chapter 8, as the vision is explained to him, that Persia is going to come and replace Babylon as the dominant power in the region. And then that Persian empire would be replaced by an empire from the west, a region called Yavan from western Turkey around the coast of the Aegean Sea. And this is the ram and the goat explanation from chapter 8. The ram is Persia and the goat is Greece, and there's going to be this clash that happens and a struggle for the control of the world. And here we have Daniel again hearing more expanded on this, because this is really about this period of history, because it says the first one has already fallen, right? Persia's already in charge. Behold, 3 more kings shall arise in Persia, and a 4th shall be richer than all of them. And then it talks about this king that's going to come from the west, and he's going to destroy the Persian Empire. And we know all of this has already happened, because there's this guy in the Greco-Persian War era because they fought for a long time over who was going to control that area of Syria and Turkey, the Greco-Persian Wars. We know that the end of the Greco-Persian Wars came with the arrival of a great emperor from this western kingdom of Greece named Alexander the Great. Rose to power, and he came sweeping in with his armies, and he destroyed the Persian Empire. But he died young, and he had no heirs, and his descendants didn't get anything out of this. And so this is what Daniel is hearing again in this first part of the vision. Now remember, when we're hearing all of these visions, there's always two sections, right? In every vision in Daniel, Daniel is told something about the immediate future, and then there's this time gap, and it switches to being told something about what's called the latter days, or the end of days, or the end of the indignation, or whatever term is used for the end days. And so this vision starts off the same way. Okay, Daniel, let me just tell you what's going to happen next year. There's going to be a few more Persian kings, and then there's just going to be this big struggle, and then there's going to be this emperor, this empire that's going to come from the west, and he is going to totally destroy the Persian Empire, but then he himself and this empire is going to be destroyed. And then we get to what's going to happen next, and we get to verse 5. And this is kind of new, because now we're getting introduced to these two characters. One's called the King of the South, and the other's called the King of the North. What happened here was, when the Greek Empire fell, it set off a period of about 50 years of internal war of several people related to Alexander, or generals, or people with power or aspirations, fighting to try and attain Alexander's throne. And it never worked out. It's called the War of the Deodoci, and they'd fought and fought and fought. And what happens is, eventually it kind of coalesces into two dominant areas. And there's the southern kingdom based in Egypt, and it was started by this guy named Ptolemy I, and his successors, and they became known as the kings of the south, the southern empire, North Africa, all the way across Egypt. And then that's the Ptolemaic Empire. And then there's the northern kingdom that kind of coalesced out of all these wars of the Deodoci. It's in Syria and Turkey. It's a guy named Seleucus, S-E-L-S-U-S, something like that. I should have looked it up, I guess. Seleucus. I don't know why I have such trouble with that. But him and his successors began to rule in Syria and Turkey, and they became known as the kings of the north in Scripture. And here's the thing with all of this. We launch into this section here of the battles to come between the king of the north and the king of the south. And God's people are caught in the crossfire of these ongoing battles between these two kings and these two kingdoms that's coming about over the foreseeable future. And we read here, we can read all about this. It's a lengthy statement. I'll read it right now. It goes all the way until verse 20. Now, I'm going to read this, but we're not going to stop on much, because you can get literally libraries full of books on this and how this stuff all came true, just like it said it came true. When God revealed to Daniel the king of the south is going to do this and the king of the north is going to do this, and we're going to hear that in a second, it all happened. It all happened exactly the way God said it was going to happen. Verse 5, after Alexander's empire falls. Verse 5, then the king of the south shall be strong, but one of his princes shall be stronger than he and shall rule, and his authority shall be a great authority. After some years they shall make an alliance, and the daughter of the king of the south shall come to the king of the north to make an agreement. But she shall not retain the strength of her arm, and he and his arm shall not endure, but she shall be given up, and her attendants, he who fathered her, and he who supported her in those times. And from a branch from her roots one shall rise in his place, and he shall come against the army, and enter the fortress of the king of the north, and he shall deal with them, and shall prevail. He shall also carry off to Egypt their gods with their metal images and their precious vessels of silver and gold, and for some years he shall refrain from attacking the king of the north. Then the latter shall come into the realm of the king of the south, but shall return to his own land. His sons shall wage war and assemble a great multitude of forces. a multitude of great forces, which shall keep coming and overflow and pass through, and again shall carry the war as far as his fortress. Then the king of the south, moved with rage, shall come out and fight against the king of the north, and he shall raise a great multitude, but it shall be given into his hand. And when the multitude is taken away, his heart shall be exalted, and he shall be cast down. And he shall cast down tens of thousands, but he shall not prevail. For the king of the north shall again raise a multitude greater than the first, and after some years he shall come on with a great army and abundant supplies. In those times many shall rise against the king of the south, and the violent among your own people shall lift themselves up in order to fulfill the vision, but they shall fail. Then the king of the north shall come up and throw up siege works and take a well-fortified city, and the fortresses of the south shall not stand, or even his best troops, for there shall be no strength to stand. But he who comes against him shall do as he wills, and none shall stand before him, and he shall stand in the glorious land with destruction in his hand. He shall set his face to come with the strength of his whole kingdom, and he shall bring terms of an agreement and perform them. And he shall give him the daughter of women to destroy the kingdom, but it shall not stand or be to his advantage. Afterward he shall turn his face to the coastlands and shall capture many of them, but a commander shall put an end to his insolence. Indeed, he shall turn his insolence back upon him. Then he shall turn his face back toward the fortresses of his own land, but he shall stumble and fall and shall not be found. Then shall arise in his place one who will send an exactor of tribute for the glory of the kingdom, but within a few days he shall be broken, neither in anger nor in battle. I'm going to stop there for now. Okay, everybody got that? Nothing to it? All the details are figured out. Yeah, if only. So all I can say is all of that stuff happened. There's very logical stories. Obviously a lot more than that happened because we only have a few paragraphs here. But all the stuff that was written here did happen. And you can look up exactly how that played out. There's several different theories exactly about what's going on here, but it's generally understood to have happened exactly as God said it was going to happen. And I stopped here because this is where the story switches. Remember I told you the visions always come in two sections. There's this, I'm going to tell you what's going to happen right now, and then there's going to be this leap forward, and I'm going to tell you what's happening at the end. And this, I know this seems like an awkward place, but what happens here is in verse 21, we hear about this, in his place shall arise a contemptible person. That's in verse 21. To whom royal majesty has not been given. He shall come in without warning and obtain the kingdom by flatteries. Okay? That starts off a section about this person. This, in his place shall arise a contemptible person to whom royal majesty has not been given. Okay, that's the subject of the rest of this section of the vision. Daniel goes on to hear, or the angel goes on to tell Daniel more and more about this contemptible person who is one day going to arise and seize the kingdom of the north as his own. Now, something else happens here that's really quite interesting and sometimes throws people off a little bit. It's at this point in the story that God does something pretty cool, actually. At this point in the story, after we've read all of these things up to verse 20, actually in history, there's an eighth king that comes out of the northern empire at this time. He begins to rule that northern kingdom. He becomes the king of the north. And you might have heard of him. This guy's name is Antiochus Epiphanes. And he was the eighth king of the northern empire. Epiphanes is a name he gave himself. His name, I forget what his real name is. It's Antiochus, and then he's like, I'm the greatest, is Epiphanes. Antiochus the greatest is what he's named himself, and he is a man of war, and he does many, many things to try and expand and control and dominate in his kingdom. And it's with this guy named Antiochus Epiphanes that God is giving us a foreshadowing, a picture, because here's the thing, we might think that he is the fulfillment that's coming next, or he's the one coming to fulfill what's spoken of next, but it's not quite like that because he doesn't accurately fulfill the things that are spoken next. Some of them he does, but not entirely, and we know that when God says something, it comes true entirely, not partially. The events of his time and the things that he did do correspond to several things we read about here. mainly around this thing called the Abomination of Desolation that gets mentioned. It's called the transgression that makes desolate. It's mentioned at least 3 times here in Daniel. It's mentioned at the end of chapter 9. It's mentioned in chapter 8. And we're going to find it in verse 31 as we read more into this chapter. Antiochus Epiphanes was a very ambitious guy. And one of the things he tried to solve, remember I said the Jewish people are caught in the crossfire between the battle between these two kingdoms. And one of the things that happens during this time, at about 150 BC, is there's 2 camps in Israel. And there's the Hellenists, and they're like, you know what, forget about this Jewish stuff. Let's just get on with living our lives. Let's become basically Roman citizens. Let's forget about being Jewish. Let's just get along, and we'll live like everybody else. Be assimilated into Greco-Roman culture. There's another group of people, though, the traditionalists, and they want nothing like that. What they want is their land back, when they want their temple working, and they want their people, and they want to be independent. They're the traditionalists, the Hellenists, and the traditionalists. Well, these two groups are, by the 150 BC or so, are getting very animated, and there's a lot of hatred, and it's starting to bubble up into violence and fighting. And so Antiochus hears about this, and he decides, you know what, I can't have a rebellion in one of my territories, or I'm going to be in trouble. So he wants to put this down for sure. And so what he thought would be a good idea, why don't I just use my armies to ban Jewishness outright everywhere? No more Jewish, no more temple, no more sacrifices, no more worship, no more nothing. Everybody is just going to be a Roman. And then what he does is he orders everyone to worship Zeus. That's going to be the litmus test of whether you're on board or not, and how he's going to catch the rebels. Well, you can see that Jews did not go along with this. They did not think this was a good idea. So Antiochus takes more action. In a brazen act of disrespect, he raided the temple of Jerusalem and took all the treasures out. And then he set up an altar to Zeus in the temple. And then he sacrificed some swine in the temple on the altar. And if you know anything about Judaism, that's not the way things are supposed to go. That is a great outrage. And when the Jews expressed their great outrage over the profaning of their temple, Antiochus didn't back down. In fact, he amped it up a little bit, and he slaughtered many Jews in Jerusalem. And he captured many and sold many into slavery at the same time. He issued very draconian decree. You couldn't do any Jewish rituals on pain of death. He ordered Jews everywhere to sacrifice to pagan gods and eat pork. That is similar to what the Bible describes the events of the last days to be. But it does not fulfill the things that have been written. We know these. We know that he matches okay, but it's not perfect. Here's the thing. The main reason is because we know what Jesus thought. And Jesus lived over 150 years after Antiochus Epiphanes lived. After Antiochus Epiphanes and all the things that he did to defile Jerusalem and defile the temple, subjugate the people. But Jesus says in the Sermon on the Mount, when his disciples are saying, hey, tell us about the end. Tell us about what you're coming again. He says this, see, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by the prophet Daniel standing in the holy place, then that those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Right? Jesus thinks that event is in the future still. It couldn't have been fulfilled by Antiochus Epiphanes because Jesus still expected future fulfillment of it. So what it is it's just foreshadowing. It's type and anti-type, and God is just showing us pictures of what's to come. Remember, the whole point of this, all of these visions, is to explain the latter days of God's people, Daniel's people. In chapter 8, God says to Gabriel, make this man understand the vision. And Gabriel goes to Daniel and he says, understand, O man, that this vision is for the time of the end. All this other stuff is just incidental. What we really want, God really wants you to know is the end of this story. He says in verse 22, it refers to many days from now. And in chapter 10, God calls to the angel, and he says, God sends the angel, and the angel comes and he says, I came to make you understand what is to happen to the people in the latter days. And God pulls back the curtains in chapter 10 and shows us the reality of the battle being fought everywhere in the spiritual realm and the physical realm. And God's revealing what's going to happen leading up to and during and after the conclusion of this battle that's being fought over the kingdoms and the peoples of this world. Okay, the Bible is clear. There is a battle being waged by God's people against the Antichrist spirit of this world. There's a spirit of Antichrist at work in this world. 1 John 4, 2 and 3 says, every spirit that confesses Jesus Christ has come in the flesh is from God. And every spirit that does not confess Jesus is not from God. This is the spirit of the Antichrist, which you heard was coming and now is in the world already. There is a spirit of Antichrist in this world, and God's people fight against that in heaven and on earth. But the Bible is also clear that this battle is going to culminate with the rising onto the stage of this world of a being that is the personification of evil and rebellion against God. All of the story of mankind is eventually going to be distilled down to a man that is going to arrive on the scene one day and take his place in the final kingdoms of this world as the Antichrist. Paul writes to the Thessalonian church about this, 2 Thessalonians 2. He says, for that day will not come. He's saying, hey, don't worry about Jesus didn't come yet. Don't be confused about this. He's still yet to come and get you, Paul is writing to the church. For that day when the Lord comes, that day will not come unless the rebellion comes first and the man of lawlessness is revealed, the son of destruction, who opposes and exalts himself against every so-called God or object of worship, so that he takes his seat in the temple of God, proclaiming himself to be God. This mystery of lawlessness is already at work, but the lawless one will be revealed. And the coming of the lawless one is by the activity of Satan with all power and false signs and wonders. The lawless one, the son of destruction, the prophesied end opponent of the saints of God. We've already heard about this guy. Daniel has mentioned him in chapter 7 and in chapter 8. Daniel calls him the little horn, or he calls him the king of bold face. And in chapter 7, we read, he has eyes like a man, a mouth speaking great things, grew exceedingly great towards the south and toward the glorious land, grew great even against the host of heaven. Became great even as the prince of the host. The regular burnt offerings were taken away. The place of his sanctuary, the host's sanctuary, was thrown down. He will throw truth to the ground. He will act and he will prosper. And when Daniel describes the king of boldface in chapter 8, when transgressions have reached their limit, this person who understands great riddles and mystery, with great power, he shall rise up and seize control. And he shall cause fearful destruction. He shall succeed in what he does. He shall destroy mighty men. He shall destroy the people of the saints. By his cunning he shall make deceit prosper under his hand. In his own mind he shall become great. Without warning he shall destroy many. He shall even rise up against the prince of princes. Already all of that stuff's been told to us. And now when we get to Daniel chapter 11, verse 21, we have a very lengthy, detailed description of those things that have already been revealed. More detail. What's this story going to look like? When this guy starts arriving on the scene to bring in his part in the end times, what's going to be happening? And that's what is written about here for the next several verses, actually all the way from here to the end of the vision, which doesn't come until chapter 12, verse 4. It's a very extensive description of the activities of this king and his kingdom. Remember, this is a message of great conflict, so we shouldn't be surprised that the content of the message is about warfare and conflict. That's what the whole point is. And this battle between the king of the north and the king of the south is one day going to be a catalyst for the emergence of this promised final king of the north to rise to power. I'm just going to read what it says, and you guys can study this at home. And what we're going to do, actually, is in a few weeks from now, we're going to have anybody who wants to just stay after church on a Sunday. And we're just going to answer questions and look at verses, and maybe a lot of the details that are in here that we can't cover today, we can ask about, and everybody can kind of have a discussion about what we've learned here and what we can learn from other passages, and where does the New Testament stuff fit into this story. And there's so many places we can go with that. We're going to do that in a few weeks. Keep your eyes open on that. Let me just read now what Daniel learned about this man of lawlessness that is going to arise in the end. Verse 21. In his place, in the last king's place, shall arise a contemptible person to whom royal majesty has not been given. He shall come in without warning and obtain the kingdom by flatteries. Armies shall be utterly swept away before him and broken, even the prince of the covenant. And from the time that an alliance is made with him, he shall act deceitfully, and he shall become strong with a small people. Without warning, he shall come into the richest parts of the province, and he shall do what neither his fathers nor his fathers' fathers have done, scattering among them plunder, spoil, and goods. He shall devise plans against strongholds, but only for a time. And he shall stir up his power in his heart against the king of the south with a great army. And the king of the south shall wage war with an exceedingly great and mighty army, but he shall not stand, for plots shall be devised against him. Even those who eat his food shall break him. His army shall be swept away, and many shall fall down slain. As for the two kings, their hearts shall be bent on doing evil. They shall speak lies at the same table, but to no avail, for the end is yet to be at the appointed time. And he shall return to his land with great wealth, but his heart shall be set against the holy covenant. And he shall work his will and return to his own land. You get the sense here? Here's some things you see on the internet. I just got to mention this. Sometimes you hear people say that this end times character, the king of the north, the little horn, the Antichrist, is going to rise to world dominance and power on a platform of peace. And that he is going to bring peace to the world, and people are going to follow him because of his ability to end warfare. Well, I don't know which Bible they're getting that out of, but my Bible says that is not true. And here we see a picture of great conflict between this king as he's rising to power and the nations around him. In fact, a lot about Egypt and how he is going to fight against Egypt and try to conquer Egypt and be unable to, and Egypt's going to fight back. And we're going to read more about there's some other nations that are mentioned and how they're affected by this battle between the king of the north and the king of the south at the end of time. Verse 29, and continues, at the appointed time he shall return and come into the south, but it shall not be this time as it was before. For ships of Kittim shall come against him. We don't know exactly what that is, but some other force, some other nations come in against him. And he shall be afraid and withdraw, and shall turn back and be enraged and take action against the holy covenant. This is similar to what Antiochus Epiphanes did. He gets frustrated and angry, unable to win his battle, so he turns his attention on Jerusalem to conquer. And the same thing is going to happen with this guy in the end. He shall turn back and pay attention to those who forsake the holy covenant. Forces with him shall appear and profane the temple and fortress, and shall take away the regular burnt offerings, and they shall set up the abomination that makes desolate. He shall seduce with flattery those who violate the covenant, but the people who know their God shall stand firm and take action. And the wise among the people shall make many understand, though for some days they shall stumble by the sword and flame, by captivity and plunder, and when they stumble they shall receive a little help. And many shall join themselves to them with flattery, and some of the wise shall stumble, so that they may be refined, purified, and made white until the time for the end, for it still awaits the appointed time. And the king shall do as he wills. He shall exalt himself and magnify himself above every god, and he shall speak astonishing things against the God of gods. He shall prosper till the indignation is accomplished, for what is decreed shall be done. He shall pay no attention to the gods of his fathers, or to the one beloved by women. He shall not pay attention to any other god, for he shall magnify himself above all. He shall honor the God of fortresses instead of these. A God whom his fathers did not know he shall honor with gold and silver, with precious stones and costly gifts. He shall deal with the strongest fortresses with the help of a foreign god. Those who acknowledge him he shall load with honor. He shall make them rulers over many, and shall divide the land for a price. At the time of the end, the king of the south shall attack him, but the king of the north shall rush upon him like a whirlwind, with chariots and horsemen, and with many ships. And he shall come into countries, and shall overflow and pass through. He shall come into the glorious land, and tens of thousands shall fall, but these shall be delivered out of his hand: Edom, Moab, and the main part of the Ammonites. He will stretch out his hand against the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape. He shall become ruler of the treasures of gold and of silver and all the precious things of Egypt, and the Libyans and the Cushites shall follow in his train. But news of the east and the north shall alarm him, and he shall go out with great fury to destroy and devote many to destruction. And he shall pitch his palatial tents between the sea and the glorious holy mountain, yet he shall come to his end with none to help him. Okay, we're going to stop there for a second. That's a long description, and there's so many things we could just kind of itemize them, list, and compare them to what's already been, and it's such a rich picture that God has given us here. He is not interested in us not knowing what's going on. He is revealing a lot of stuff about what's going to happen at the end of days. This message of great conflict, this battle between the north and the king of the north and the king of the south, is going to one day erupt into this conflict. Now, the closing statement, I'm going to read it here. We'll get into it next week more, because there's still more to come. But the messenger closes his statement to Daniel like this. Chapter 12, verse 1. At that time, okay, at the time that all of those things I was just talking about happened, at that time shall arise Michael, the great prince who has charge of your people. And there shall be a time of trouble such as never has been since there was a nation till that time. But at that time your people shall be delivered, everyone whose name is found written in the book, and many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, and some to shame and everlasting contempt. And those who are wise shall shine like the brightness of the sky above, and those who turn many to righteousness like the stars forever and ever. But you, Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book until the time of the end. Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall increase. I know that's a lot, and we're going to unpack that stuff more in classes in the future. And if you want to talk about assembly, any kind of note, or give me a call or whatever. Here's the thing. This is why Daniel is the most criticized book in the whole Bible. It has been declared fiction and fancy by the scholars of our world for our existence. Why? Because it's impossible to write what Daniel wrote when he claimed he wrote it. The declarations of the future that Daniel wrote are too accurate. They're too detailed. It couldn't have been written beforehand. And of course that makes sense, right? I mean, if you believe that Mother Nature is all there is when it comes to the forces driving this world, if you believe that everything happens just because of randomness, just a series of coincidences with no purpose, that the only thing behind what we see in this world is the battle of the survival of the fittest, then of course Daniel couldn't have written what he wrote in 550 BC. But I don't believe that. And maybe you don't either. That an endless series of cosmic accidents is a very good explanation for what we see around us in this world. There's another, better, I think, alternative presupposition that this isn't all the result of randomness and chance. That molecules colliding, molecules crashing together with no meaning or intent driving them is what has produced this world. But that there is rather a God who has made all of this for a reason, a creator so powerful that he could bring all of this universe into existence because he decided to. That the existence of space and time and matter and past and present and future is not best explained by a series of random, unexplainable events. But that the things we see, space and time and matter and past and present and future, exist because there is an all-powerful creator who designed them all for their purpose. And if that's true, then what exactly is our problem with Daniel. The claims of this book are not a problem if there's a God like that. If there is a God who has the power of creation, then everything that Daniel writes is more than possible. Daniel has witnessed and testifies to in his writing some incredible things. We read a whole bunch of them today. But we've been reading incredible things from Daniel through the whole book, haven't we? What's the story of Daniel? Well, again, Daniel's telling us this whole thing is Daniel's telling us who God is and what God is doing. Chapter 1, what's the point of chapter 1? Well, it's that wisdom and understanding come from God, come nowhere else. Right? It says in chapter 1, verse 17, when it talks about Daniel and his teenage buddies that have been captured, it says, God gave them learning and skill in all literature and wisdom. And it says, in every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king inquired of them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters that were in his kingdom. That's what's being pictured here. Wisdom comes from God alone. Babylon, the largest, most prosperous empire that the world had ever known. All the resources and talents available in that empire. All the wise men and sages and Chaldeans and astrologers that the king could gather in Babylon. Hundreds, thousands of them. The most learned in all the land. All of them eclipsed by the wisdom of a teenage slave boy from Jerusalem. Only God is the source of wisdom. What's the story of chapter 2? God is the revealer of mysteries. God's the one who knows the future. Right? Everything's the story about the whole the fiery furnace idea. Oh no, that's the next chapter. Sorry, chapter 2. It's the Nebuchadnezzar's dream. Remember that? Nebuchadnezzar has this dream, doesn't know what it is. Then everybody's going to get killed if someone doesn't give Nebuchadnezzar an answer to this question. Not just what the dream meant, you actually have to tell him what the dream was because he can't even remember. And Daniel goes to his buddies and then he says, seek mercy from God, the God of heaven, concerning this mystery. And God answers them, and Daniel thanks God. He says, blessed be the name of God forever and ever. He changes times and seasons. He removes kings and sets up kings. He reveals deep and hidden things. He knows what dwells in darkness. And then the declaration at the end of the chapter by Nebuchadnezzar, verse 47, truly your God is God of gods and Lord of kings and revealer of mysteries. And God alone is the source of wisdom. God alone is the revealer of the mysteries of the future. Chapter 3, what's that? God's able to rescue. It's the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They're not going to bow to the statue. And what does Nebuchadnezzar level at them? He says this, if you do not worship, verse 15, you shall immediately be cast into a burning fiery furnace. And then he asks them this question, and who is the God who will deliver you out of my hands? They answer him. They say, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. Well, what happens? Well, the end result is that it's Neb's servants who are dead on the ground, burned to death, and the servants of God are standing there without a scratch on them in front of him. How does Nebuchadnezzar respond to that? Verse 28 and 29, blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and delivered his servants who trusted in him, for there is no God who is able to rescue in this way. Wisdom comes from God. God reveals the future. God is the one who rescues. How about chapter 4? God is able to humble. It's the story of Nebuchadnezzar's dream. God reveals to him, no, one day, Nebuchadnezzar, you're going to go mad, and then you're going to spend 7 years living like an animal out in the bush. But after that 7 years is done, I'm actually going to give you your sanity back, and I'm going to give you your throne back. That's what I'm going to do. And why is God going to do this? Because Nebuchadnezzar needs to learn something. Verse 25, God says, this will happen to you till you know that the Most High rules the kingdom of men and gives it to whom he will. Now, is God able to teach this lesson? Is God able to humble Nebuchadnezzar? Of course he is. In the end of his life, Nebuchadnezzar says, I praise and exalt the honor and honor the King of heaven, for all his works are right and all his ways are just, and those who walk in pride he is able to humble. Not only is God able to rescue us from external threats like the fiery furnace, but he is able to rescue from the threat inside us, the threat of our own pride and our own rejection of God. God is able to save us from our own hearts. He's able to change our hearts. Chapter 5, lesson there, the writing on the wall, God's able to judge. It doesn't matter how many people are with him in his mocking of God in this Belshazzar's feast. It doesn't matter how strong or impregnable he thinks the walls of Babylon might be to protect him. One day, God's judgment arrives, and there's nothing anyone can do about it. We read God has numbered his days. He's been weighed and found wanting, and his kingdom has been divided. And that has been the declaration hanging over humanity since the beginning. Our days are numbered. We are all weighed and found wanting, and our kingdoms, however large or small, will be divided and given to others. Already some amazing things that God has revealed, Daniel has revealed to us about God, and here's just more. More details, but just as true as the other things that he has revealed. The band's going to come up. We're going to sing. All of that stuff that I just explained about chapter 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, we could spend several sermons talking about Daniel in the lion's den and what that teaches us, and all of the other things. All that stuff, that is already revealed even before we get to the dreams and visions that Daniel writes. Before we catch a glimpse of the unseen world around us and the battle that's going on in that realm. But if all those things that I just talked about from the first few chapters of Daniel, and just the first half of what Daniel wrote, if all of those things are true, then God revealing some things about his plan for the future in this area of the world is not really a problem, is it? He can do that. In a way, that's the whole story of the Bible. God is revealing to us what he's going to do, and then him doing it. God says, I'm going to do this, and then the Bible says, and God did that. And when it comes to the things that he has said that he's going to do that he hasn't done yet, is a good question. No matter how unlikely or even outlandish we may think things may be that are predicted, are they any less likely to come true or any less trustworthy than anything else God has revealed to us about his purposes? There is a God who possesses all wisdom and knowledge. This God knows all things, including the future. This God is more powerful than the kings of this earth, and he's able to save. This God is able to humble us. He can actually change our own hearts. And this God has the authority and the power to judge, and one day he will. That's the God that Daniel trusted. That's the God that Daniel wrote about. That's the God Daniel prayed to. That's the God Daniel worshiped. That is the same God that we trust in and that we pray to and we worship today. He is just as much God of the future now as he was God of the future in Daniel's day. We are in the same boat Daniel was. We are all waiting for God to bring about the next things he said were going to happen in this world. That's our God, the revealer of mysteries and the declarer of the truth. He is the one in charge. He is the one who humbles and judges and the one who saves. He's always been this. He will never change. He is the same yesterday, today, and forever, and he will never stop until every single word that he has spoken has come true, no matter what anyone thinks about it or tries to do to stop him. That's the God we serve. Let's sing to him now.